Good morning. Call this meeting to order, the fifth and final meeting of the Budget Review Subcommittee on Education. Amy, if you would please call the roll.
Senator Kerr, Senator Parrott, Senator Wise, Representative Banta, here. Representative Bojanowski, here. Representative Fleming, here. Representative Flood, Representative Graham, Representative McCool,
Here.
Representative Miller, Co-Chair Riley, here. Co-Chair Tipton, here. Chair West.
Here. We do not have a quorum, so we'll skip over the approval of the minutes for now. We'll go ahead and get started. We got a lot of ground to cover. We have three very, very important subjects. If we would have Kentucky State University first approach, and I think there are 4 representatives from K-State. I feel like we're becoming friends. I see you on a pretty regular basis. So if you would, please, everyone identify themselves for the record, and please proceed whenever you're ready.
I'm Ronald Johnson, and I'm the interim president at Kentucky State University.
I'm Darrell Burnett, and I'm Kentucky State Chief Operating Officer.
I'm Bridget Elliott Goldman, and I'm the interim vice president for student engagement.
And I'm Dr. Gerald Shields. I'm the chief financial officer.
Thank you, Senator West and the other members of the committee. We are here to report on a number of inquiries, but I'd like to begin by just making a few comments about the management improvement plan that was turned into the LRC yesterday, approved by the CPE board. And so I just basically have a statement that we really commend Dr. Thompson and the CPE team, as well as my colleagues.
Could you hold on one second? Co-Chair Tipton and myself have a copy of this plan. If any member of the committee would like a copy of the plan, they can ask staff, and it will be provided to them. Sorry about that.
No
Please
problem.
Proceed.
And, they worked diligently in a short period of time, to bring about a management improvement plan for Kentucky State University. And the plan itself lays out what we need to build a platform to enable Kentucky State University to return to a vibrant institution that has positive and significant impact for the Commonwealth. It has included in the plan a number of KPIs and timelines. Of equal importance, the plan has the necessary flexibility needed so that the university's management and the board of regents can respond to new discoveries with respect to operational challenges and challenges in the competitive landscape, the nature of work, and the preferences reflecting the value of higher education in the community writ large. So I just want to say that it's a tour de force. Now, of course, the heavy lifting comes where we have to now make it a reality. But thank you. Next up will just be a brief report on enrollment. That will be Dr. Goldman. Following Dr. Goldman will be Dr. Burnett. He'll talk about the status of the external audit, and then the financial update will be provided by our interim CFO, Dr. Shields.
Great. During our last visit, we shared with you our numbers as it relates to enrollment, but our enrollment had not been finalized at that point in time. So I wanted to give you some updated numbers and our final numbers for the fall 2022 semester. So right now we're trending at 1459, and versus last year, fall 2021, we were at 1457. And so our enrollment is pretty much flat, but it is in accordance to what we budgeted. And so that's 1459.
Chair West, I would like to give you an update on the internal audit, and I think this is going to be good news. First of all, let me give you a little bit of the backdrop of an external audit. It's primarily intended to ensure that our financial records have been compiled accurately. Every institution across the country who are seeking aid from the federal government must go through this process. On 1st of September, we were able to complete our 2021 financial statements. These financial statements are balance sheets, income statement, and cash flow. Then on October 4th, we put a RFP to solicit a accounting firm to come in and actually do the independent audit. On October the 12th, our Board of Regents approved this request, and on October the 31st, we were able to not only review an audit firm that was willing to come in and actually do the audit, but also were able to submit that proposal to the Contract Review Committee, and we're waiting their response on that. If all goes well with the Contract Review Committee, the audit firm feels as though they can begin their audit work on the 10th of November, which is shortly next week. It's going to take roughly, I would say, 4 to 6 months because it's going to take 4 weeks of planning for this audit firm. And this is the audit firm's first time examining Kentucky State's records. Usually when you have an audit firm that's familiar with the institution, it doesn't take as long because much of the data is already there and their familiarity is already there. But because this is the audit firm, the accounting firm's first engagement with Kentucky State, it may take a little longer. The field work and then the actual compilation of the report. So we're anticipating around the March, April timeframe when the audit will be completed for 2021. Keep in mind, we have not completed 2022 yet, but upon completing 2021 audit and getting a favorable opinion, then we'll proceed forward with the 2022 audit, and that will help us get caught up. Thank you, sir.
Okay, I will give you the update of first quarter financials for Kentucky State University. Our total source of revenue for our annual budget for the year is $41 million. Under the first quarter, we had budgeted $16,222,100. Our actual revenue for our first quarter was $15,356,000 and change. Now, this is showing a reduction in our revenue of about $865,000. This is made up primarily one of some of our state appropriation that we haven't totally received, which is about $500,000. And then we had a reduction in the number of students that are living on campus from the previous year, and that affected our auxiliaries, and that was about another $550,000. So if you take those two in consideration, we pretty much wipe out the $865,000 reduction in the revenue. Now, we also have some good news when it comes to our salary and wages. We had an annual budget of $20 million for our salaries. Our first quarter budget would have been $5,000. Our actual payroll for the first quarter was $4,001.945, which gives a reduction in our payroll for the first quarter of almost $1 million. Under the fringe benefits, we have benefit budgeted annually for $7 million. The first quarter budget would have been $1,750,000. Our actual was $1,107,252, which is another reduction of $642,748 in reduction of fringe benefits for the first quarter. Our operating budget for the year was $13 million. I mean, our first quarter was budgeted at $3,250,000. Our actual was $3,083,388, another reduction of $166,612. Now, under expenditures by category, it shows that if you do the combination of both our payroll and our operating budget, it does balance out to the $41 million. And it shows that we had a first quarter budget of $10,500,000, and our actual was $8,692,585 for a reduction of a first quarter in expenditures of $1,807,415. That concludes my report.
So Senator West and committee, that is our update, and certainly we are ready for questions.
Thank you so much. Excellent report. Before we get any questions from members, I've got a request. So I have one question, and then hopefully you can do this presentation for me. But the management improvement plan under 250, we received this yesterday. So obviously we're taking our time to review the plan and things of that nature. Has anyone contacted you? You're not testifying in the overall A&R committee today, correct? Is that
No.
okay? So I'm assuming there are no December meetings, so our next chance to see you guys will be January. So could you just really quickly give us a high-level bullet point synopsis of the management improvement plan, and then we'll open up to questions. And it doesn't have to be in great detail, just a general.
Okay. You want it now, or you want us to send it?
If you could do that now, and
Yeah,
then
I can.
then we'll go into questions.
Okay, well, the plan has 8 components to it, and it is staged. We sat with CPE to assign various individuals as well as functions at the university to have responsibility. Some of the components of the plan have already been acted upon. The training of our board, we had CPE had its board training back in September, and then in October we had a half-day training of our board with AGB, the Association of Governing Boards, to help our board understand, especially in that meeting, how to deploy committees effectively so that it improves their ability to meet their requirements for oversight. In addition, there are several other components of the plan that are underway. We shared when we were here last month that we're planning to bring in a team to get our financials and accounting information organized and ready, as well as our policies related to procurement and reporting pulled together. And in the management improvement plan, there are incentive awards, and one of the incentive awards would be to help us actually pay for that team. And there's a total of $500,000 in the plan, which we believe is sufficient to help us move the ball forward. In addition, the plan calls for really creating career streams and salary bands so that we can actually properly compensate our people. And we have actually begun the process. We may need to bring in an outside team to finalize the details of the plan, but that's currently underway. There are several other areas that are underway, and especially in terms of the focus on student success. In the last meeting that we had with you, we talked about the restructuring that we did so that we could be better prepared to handle what is required in CPE. And as well, in the last meeting, I shared with you some of the statistics that will need to be modified, and we will be making those modifications and discussions with CPE so that we actually have really a clear path to meet the requirements for student progression, graduation, and other indicators for student satisfaction and success. Lastly, in terms of just summarizing across the body of the document, it calls for a really close working relationship with us, between us and CPE. We're on the ground, and as a result, there will be times in which we will come back to CPE for some of their direct support, as well as the plan reserves some dollars out of the $5 million that's been allocated, so that we can, if we have a bottleneck, we can actually bring in a team that can help us move the ball down the field.
Thank you so much. Sounds great. I'm going to save. I have a few questions. I'm going to save those and defer to Co-Chair Tipton. He has some questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the report today. Under House Bill 250, part of the charge was to evaluate all the programs at the university and basically cut costs. Now, you referenced that the reduction in payroll, the reduction in benefit costs, is that attributed to staff members leaving, or has KSU actually engaged in the process of reviewing and possibly eliminating positions and programs?
I can answer. Oh,
Go ahead.
I can answer that question. It's both. Obviously, people have left. Some of the people that have left would have actually been escorted out. Okay, some of them we wish we didn't lose. But the other piece is that it's really important to understand that in getting the institution to its proper balance requires that you actually invest in the areas that you expect to add the kind of value you need, and then you reallocate from the areas that you don't. In this short window, we have not been able to do that much because we have a going concern. We have students on campus. We had to get them enrolled, and so the steps to really balance out who, what, and what kinds of talent we need is forthcoming. But the way it gets funded is by reducing the investments in areas that are not adding the kind of value and impact that we need, and then investing in those areas that do. And we do that in the context of not only the impact, which involves our ability to bring in students, add value to those students, and then get them to completion. But in addition to that, we have to do it in a way that is financially viable. That requires, again, more than just taking an axe and cutting. It requires really understanding what you need. In many instances, that will mean that the compensation for a specific position will go up because we need a better talent, and then we will trade out the talent that's there. But the question, to answer your question, yes, it has been both. Some people have left because the handwriting was on the wall. Others have left because they're just burnt out. We're trying not to burn out the good people, and we're trying to essentially restructure our organization so that those people who can be made more productive, we will then help them to get to that status, because it's always cheaper to retain people who have institutional knowledge. However, those people who we know that just can't work in the environment that we expect to be in, then we will move to have them leave the institution. Last but not least, we have made certain decisions because, as I mentioned, in the first phase of our operation, it's really trying to get to stabilization. Stabilization requires de-risking the institution. De-risking the institution meant that we had to have an emergency declaration with respect to health and safety, and to totally overhaul that operation. And then the de-risking also meant that we restructured so we can actually have a better focus on how we bring in students and how we retain them, and we put them all together. And that's what we did with Dr. Goldman's area. De-risking also meant that we have to have the financial information and the accounting information that we need, one for decision making, but two for reporting, especially reporting to the U.S. Department of Education. That we don't have that information, that puts this institution in a really problematic situation. And then last but not least, de-risking involves really understanding what information is actually the relevant information as opposed to what people are just producing. And so that's what we've done. The next phase, though, involves looking at people and looking at programs to make a determination what we need and whether we in fact need either the program or the people.
Thank you, President Johnson. I know you're in a very difficult situation. If I do have one additional question.
Please proceed.
House Bill 250 also called for the implementation of a 10-year review policy. Could you give us an update on the status of that implementation timeline when that will be moving forward?
I missed part of your question. Implementation of which? I'm sorry.
So it called for a 10-year review policy.
Oh yeah, okay. Because it calls for both a post-tenure review policy and an annual review policy. What we're doing right now is we're working to make sure that those two policies, along with tenure, promotion, and reappointment, actually work together. The principal challenge with doing it the way it actually was done before I got here was that it just opens the door to a lot of litigation. That those three things have to fit together. There's a three corner hat: annual review, tenure, promotion, and reappointment, or called TPR, and then post-tenure review, PTR. The annual review in higher education, but in any institution, is an indicator of performance, and typically someone who's not performing, unless it's egregious, would be put on a performance improvement plan. Post-tenure review essentially is a look back. Did you look back at the person's contributions over time, and then you determine whether or not they deserve the opportunity to put together a performance improvement plan, or you make a decision that there's an exit strategy. All those two policies, along with the tenure, promotion, and reappointment policies, have to be consistent, because if they're not, then you open up avenues for people to come back and claim that they have rights over here that you didn't cover, or rights over there that you didn't cover. And so as a result, we are really literally pardon the change in the metaphor, we're squaring the circle. But it's a three corner hat that has got to be totally consistent, because in higher education, I think higher education is the birthplace for litigation. And litigation, even if you win, means that your leadership is sitting in depositions for hours and hours and hours and hours. Your retention on your insurance gets eaten up, and then your insurance companies start to do the moonwalk away from you. So it has to be done the right way, and that's what we're working on right now. We expect that certainly by the time we come before this committee, that will be finalized.
Clarification of prior comments. If you're a member of the committee, you do not need to request a copy of the management improvement plan. Staff is going to automatically send that to you, so that's coming your way. I got a couple questions real quick. And my first question is in reference to a question that I asked in our last meeting, and it deals with staffing ratios. And I honestly don't know the answer to this question. So your enrollment is currently 1459. I think you currently have, as far as how many employees do you have? Like 450, kind of in that range?
We have about 425 employees currently at this time.
425. So full disclosure, I'm going to round up. Okay, I'm going to round a little bit. So that's approximately a 3-to-1 ratio employee-student. Is that a good ratio compared to other universities, or is that average or high, low? Do you know the answer to that question?
Well, I would say this, that we've not actually looked at the ratios for other institutions, although Kentucky State University, as well as the other public institutions in Kentucky, are part of what's called the Delaware study, and we have yet to go and look at those costs. One of the differences, however, is that Kentucky State is, in fact, a land-grant institution, and so you have to take into account that a number of the people who are at Kentucky State in land-grant are in extension services. So you would actually have to make, in order to come back to you with the numbers, we'd actually have to make a number of adjustments. Also, there are a number of people in land-grant who are on research, and those people are not in the E&G budget. So we can actually come back and give you a better answer and do the comparisons, especially using Delaware study data, as well as any information that CP may have on the
Yeah, I think you don't have to present on that again. If you could just send us a letter, kind of showing that information, we would appreciate that if you could
Okay.
do that. Real quick, just in case you have it, do you happen to know how many of those, that 425, are extension, roughly? And I don't need an exact number, it's just rough guesstimate.
I would say it would be roughly about 125,
A
130.
very significant portion of that 425.
Yes.
Gotcha. Moving on to the audit, couple questions relating to the audit. You mentioned you'll have a team that will be working on accounting issues. When you reference the team, were you talking about this accounting firm that you've hired, that you're going to hire, or is that a separate team that will be assisting you all in conjunction with the outside accounting firm?
It's a separate. We have a consulting firm who is well versed in doing audit in all of the subject matter areas of the business office, and that's what we're looking for as far as the detailed requirements that we put in our RFP. We're hoping to get that group on board around the early December timeframe, if not sooner. And then once they're engaged, then I will also be supporting them. I bring a wealth of experience as a CFO at various other colleges and universities. So from an independent perspective, I will be able to provide some additional assistance and guidance in that direction.
Is that an approved RFP
Yes,
for the consultant?
not approved by the contract review committee. It was submitted on Monday.
It's in the works.
But it's in the work, yes, sir.
Gotcha.
Absolutely. Also, what else is in the works is the independent audit. That consulting firm that we're pursuing that will serve as a independent assessor for our campus. That is also in the works. It's in front of the contract review committee. So we'll have a combination of those two sources as additional oversight on how we will get our business policies and procedures and internal controls in order.
Gotcha. Thank you. I got one final question, but before I do that, do we have any other members with questions in this segment? Seeing none, I have a request, and I think I'm careful not to speak for the legislature, but a personal opinion and what would be really helpful to us, and you can chime in if you've discussed this with the firm. As far as the timeline goes on the audit and return of information, even if the audit isn't done, it would be really nice for us to have some kind of report or information on that audit before April 1st, while we're in session, just something. It would be very helpful to us. Even if the audit's not complete, if they could, your audit team and outside accounting firm could provide a report to one of the committees here, that would be great. And that's my request.
Yes, sir.
Do you all have any other comments? I'm going to bring CPE up here just to give a few comments, and then that'll be it. Do you all have any other comments you'd like to add? Or
I just want to add that, as I mentioned earlier, this is phased. The first thing is to deal with the risk that can just put you out of business, and so that's what we've tried to do. But then the next phase deals with the risk of having people that are not adding the value that you need. And so we're about to enter into that phase, and we will be able to discuss it in more detail when we meet again in January.
Thank you so much. Appreciate your testimony. I'm sorry, Representative Graham has a question.
It's not a question as much as it is a comment, Mr. Chairman. I would hope that we would allow the university to bring those individuals in who are going to evaluate the books. And I don't think when you have someone who's coming in to evaluate, they try to provide information after they have concluded all of the research and looked at the numbers as well as the paperwork. So I think it would be very difficult for those who are going to be doing the audit to be able to provide something to us without it all being finished. So I think that's a request that I think it's not to me, it's unfair for them to try to provide that to us. I want them to be able to have a thorough analysis of the books. And in order for us as General Assembly members, in order for us to make decisions, continue the funding of the university, we need to have all that information at one time when it is completed. So I don't think we ask anyone to provide us with an incomplete evaluation of accounting. And so I would suggest to the body that we allow the agency who is going to look at the university's books, that they be allowed to provide us with a full, detailed, completed evaluation. So those are the only comments that I have. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I don't think we disagree. I'm not asking for a premature report with inadequate information. My request was, if you can tell us what you do know that's actually factual, that would be good. And just to further clarify where my question is coming from, is actually an attempt to help KSU, because I feel that it will look somewhat suspect if we get a full audit report the day after we leave town. So that's kind of where I was going with that. It was a no effort to push for inadequate information, and I think we agree.
We agree. I just wanted to make that clear, that I hope that we're not pushing too fast without information that is complete. And I'm not saying that. I'm just saying normally that's what happens when you have an accounting firm coming in to provide the information. And I appreciate the comments that you just made, so that if the university is needed in terms of appropriation of more dollars, which I think we should, that's something that we should look into as we are here for the 2023 session. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think that's fairly clear to KSU, and you know what we're looking at. So appreciate that. If CPE could come forward. We're on a tight time schedule, so please present after you have named yourself for the record. And I'm just looking for like a 5-minute, 2-minute update on the report, improvement plan, and the perspective from CPE.
Happy to do that. Travis Powell, Vice President and General Counsel from CPE. I have Greg Rush, Senior Fellow, and Dr. Stephanie Mayberry, who's our Senior Director for KSU Relations, here with me for any questions. Just so quickly, I thought Dr. Johnson did a nice job of sort of hitting the overview of the plan as your question. Obviously, we've been really focused on getting that done in the last month. Feel really proud and excited about what we have in there. Maybe a few comments just about as you start to look at this document, sort of how to frame it and the lens to sort of view it from. Dr. Johnson alluded to this. this is a dynamic plan, and Representative Tipton, you'll remember when we worked on this legislation, we wanted to make sure that we had a provision in there that allowed for revisions to come to the plan as we move forward. And this is a 3-year plan, and as you see the objectives outlined in this document, a lot of them are very front-loaded on things that we would look for in the first year, year and a half, 2 years of the plan. There are some longer term items in there, but some of the items you'll see will be evaluations of certain functions on the campus. And we're asking for reports on those evaluations. And then once we see what those reports are, and we'll have input in those evaluations as well as CP and KSU staff work together, then we'll set new objectives based on what we find from these reviews. We didn't have time, between April and the November deadline to do the reviews ourselves. So one of the deliverables that we have in the plan is actually to do the evaluations. And then based on those evaluations, we'll have new objectives that come forward as we go through year 2, year 3 of the plan. The first part of the document outlines all the objectives in each of the 8 areas outlined in the legislation. We can add new areas to the plan if we want, but they're pretty all-encompassing. This pretty much covers every area of the institution, so there was really no need to add any new areas. There's about, I haven't counted them, but probably 80, 90 objectives in here. So it's a lot, but it covers all aspects of the institution. In the first attachment of the document, you will see a spreadsheet that outlines each objective. And each objective will have a deliverable, a benchmark, a deadline for completion, and then if any 2023 funding will be distributed based on the completion of those objectives. We didn't include 2024. That's the $5 million in the 2023. We have $10 million in 2024. We didn't include any of those in this plan. Those will come in a further update. So if you don't see the $10 million allocated, that's why we only dealt with 2023, and we still have some money, as Dr. Johnson mentioned, left over, about $1.8 million that we haven't allocated of 2023 funding. Want to kind of see where we go in this first quarter. The evaluation, first evaluation, we're doing quarterly evaluation, is going to be due in March. So at that time, we can kind of see where we're at, see if we want to add any new incentives at that point to account for the additional, $1.8 million. So. But it's going well. We're working well with staff there. Excited to get started. I mean, I feel like we're already in the implementation phase. As Dr. Johnson mentioned, a lot of these things are already in process. And I think you'll find as you read through them, these are things that the institution needs to be doing already. These are not something additional that, you wouldn't expect a high-functioning institution to already be involved in on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you so much. We'll leave it there for now.
Okay.
Do we have any questions from members for CPE? Seeing none, we'd like to hear more, but we have other subjects behind you.
Glad to come back and talk at any time to give you more information.
Appreciate the update, and we will be reviewing the report.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you.
Next, we are going to go out of order a little bit on our docket, and so we're going to bring up some people for the school construction project subject. If you could come to the table now. Why don't you all come up, all together. At the same time, and we'll talk about this subject on school construction and gap funding. So if you could introduce yourselves for the record, and then we'll hop into it.
Sure. I'm Cherry Ritter with the Kentucky Department of Education.
I'm Harry Burchett. I'm superintendent of Harrison County Schools.
Brian Kreisman, superintendent of Fleming County Schools.
Thank you. So before we start, two members of the committee, Dr. Kreisman and Dr. Burchett, Fleming County and Harrison County is in my district, and so that was purposeful. They're in my district, and I have firsthand knowledge of this issue because of these superintendents in my district, but these are not achievement gaps. We're talking about the gap funding for school construction. I'm assuming that this issue is across the Commonwealth. And Representative Tipton and I were trying to prepare the legislature for this issue as we roll into session. We feel that it will be a very, very important issue. So I guess, Che, if you would proceed first, and then Dr. Burchett and Dr. Kreisman.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Senator West. If it's okay, Senator, I would like to sort of accelerate my slides to allow a little more time for my friends here to
That
speak.
would be perfect.
Okay,
Yes,
thanks.
much appreciated.
So we've provided some information. Give you a little background. Back in July, I was asked to speak with the Capital Planning Advisory Board, and the same presentation. And it was unfortunate that later that month we had floods in eastern Kentucky. So construction is something in my office which is a constant, and by constant we have 171 districts and a lot of projects going on at once. And I submitted to this committee sort of the process and the way that works. So we'll skip over that. But obviously, if you have any questions about that, I'm here to answer those. One of the important things is the existing funding. Districts have some limited options. They can adopt and restrict by law what we call nickels. And it's just a portion of their tax rate that they restrict for facilities, renovations, new construction. And if you look at all 171 districts, there's mandatory 1 nickel for each district, so they restrict that. And some districts have gone out and adopted, and through legislation over the many years, the General Assembly's written legislation which allowed growth districts to levy specific nickels for projects. And then now the active one we have out there is what's called the recallable nickel. And if you're in a community that has one of these recently, there's a process in which the district will adopt, the public can petition it, and it may be forced to a vote. However, as time has gone on, some districts are actually doing 2 of these, so you effectively have 3 nickels in order to reach their facility needs. Through the state budget, there's state equalization of these nickels. This is a very important chunk of money for these districts. Without this, a lot of these projects would never even take off. School Facilities Construction Commission, otherwise known as SFCC, there's offers of assistance and then special offers of assistance. This is a very important part of the process as well. Financing districts issue bonds, much like counties and cities do. Obviously, interest rates right now are, sort of a perfect storm of material cost, labor, and interest rates. So as their borrowing power, just like us, as it goes down, you can get less and less of that project that you need. And this can sometimes result in this gap that, as he mentions, not the achievement gap, but this gap is more or less, we have a project, this is what we'd like to do, but our bonding will not allow us to reach that final goal. So the decisions have to be made, and I'll give you a couple examples of those. But decisions such as, do we reduce the scope of the project? Do we do it in phases? And when you do things in phases, and I can't predict the economic future, but cost in construction generally goes up. So if you delay building, and I'm sure they'll tell you, if you could travel back in time and start these projects, a lot of these districts would do so. So these are all very, I think, important concerns of the districts and my office as well. We speak to them on a daily basis. Let me skip up. One important bill that came out of the last regular session was House Bill 678. And the reason this was so important is it removed some barriers and some processes so districts could accelerate these projects. My office reviewed a lot of these building plans, and there was a big, long process in place. It's a good process, but it took a while. House Bill 678, which was passed by this body, removed some of those barriers. It's sort of a 2-year test, if you will. If it's not picked up again by the General Assembly, it will expire. But right now, I think I have on here the wrong number. We just checked this morning. It's 150 districts. Their boards have signed up for this. So this removes a lot of the review process. The districts are still responsible for following the law. It's just not, go out and do whatever you want. There are still laws in place and rules, and they are required to follow these. This sped up, but also can save them quite a bit of time, and time is money in the construction business. So these are just 2 charts to give you an idea of what construction costs have done over a longer term period and more recently shorter term. So a couple of projects that we just plucked, and we have hundreds of these, but these were ones we were pretty familiar with. In Menifee County, they removed a basement from a project to save about $1 million. So obviously a decision was made, they couldn't quite get that central office the way they wanted it. So effectively they're going to have to pay for storage elsewhere, which can be obviously an additional cost. Rowan County, I just actually updated this from the previous slides we did for the Capital Planning Advisory Board. $5.5 million, then it moves up to 6.2, and last we checked it was 8.1 million on a project. These are not out of line with what we're seeing elsewhere. Christian County is one of our bigger projects. They're consolidating 2 high schools in western Kentucky, and this started, I'm pretty familiar with this. We speak to them quite often since this is such a large project. 107 million, moves up to 117, and now we're in the neighborhood of 137. That was in May. So there's this expectation that if it doesn't get moving, it's going to get more expensive in a hurry. Woodford County is a new high school. Obviously, this is in my backyard. Drive by there, the old high school, quite often. Effectively, almost doubled like that, or a little bit more than double, I guess. So this is Woodford's got that one high school. This is going to be one of the largest projects they probably do in Woodford for quite some time. So they want to do it right, but that cost really accelerated in a hurry. And again, the construction costs are sort of outpacing our bonding potential these districts have. Districts will reduce the scope of these projects and may not get the project they necessarily want. And like I said, for some of these districts, and I'm sure these gentlemen to my right will probably agree, it's sort of like building your dream home. These high schools, these elementary schools and middle schools, you want to put the right stuff in it. You want to build it the way you want to build it. So it's a great long-term investment for your students, for your teachers. And this cost is really starting to kind of strangle that. Now, mileage may vary. Some districts are smaller projects may not have as much impact on this. They might be doing some large HVAC renovations, and they're not running into the same issues, but costs have most definitely gone up. And I was going to leave some time for my colleagues here to the right to, if you all have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them as well.
We'll hold the questions for now.
Thank
Thank you. We got about 10 minutes in this segment, so you guys can act accordingly. And I don't know what you're going to say. I'm assuming I know what you're going to say, but for me personally, if you could just share your personal experience with Harrison County and Fleming County, how this has affected you. I'm assuming you're going to do that, but just make sure you cover that, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman West and members. In accordance with what Mr. Ritter has said, I think we can all agree the importance of the learning space on teaching and learning, and that the impact, there's clear research on that. Harrison County is home to 7 educational facilities. 6 of them we operate. 1 is an area technology center we own, maintain, provide the maintenance and upgrade. The state operates that facility. The total age of those facilities is 416 years, or an average of 60 years per facility. The newest facility was constructed in 1976, our middle school. The high school was constructed and opened in 1951. And as a result, we are experiencing significant impact on plant maintenance and operations on those facilities. The 4 elementary schools all opened in 1964 as a part of consolidation in that community back at that time. And so it's almost like a perfect storm of the impact of the weight and load of all of that at one time. There is, when we started this process, there was $25 million in unmet need on 3 of those outlying elementary schools. That number today is $34 million. As well as on our KFIX list, the educational suitability rating of our existing high school for what we're doing in that facility is currently 29%. That's an adequacy issue. We are educating and helping our students find careers for the future. About 75% of our students don't go on to a regular 4-year degree program. They are choosing career pathways. And we are one of the main suppliers for Toyota, 3M, CMWA, those type of institutions as well as healthcare. So we had a problem of practice. How do we address that as a community? The community came together. We decided to tax ourselves, this nickel facility tax, and thank you, legislature, for matching that. And we were on a path to get where we needed to be. But as a result of the inflationary cost and what's happened over the last 2 years, now our costs have increased by almost 35%, which has then once again created another gap or a shortfall in us being able to get to that project. Our project is unique. We're consolidating to 1 campus, eliminating 3 outlying buildings. That cuts cost on SROs, other things. We would realize once this transition has occurred, a net savings of approximately $1.5 million a year on our general fund operations that is a resource that can go back into those systems and those opportunities for our students. And we can work on the remaining facility issues at our existing high school, middle school, and other places. Let me be clear, on that list, we're not closing our existing high school. It would be repurposed and we would move our populations. Now it would become a middle school center and our elementaries would come into our existing middle school, thus raising or elevating the educational suitability rating as according to KFIX at a great level at all areas, at all levels. And so the cost to not do something today is an ongoing loss or return on investment in our community of $1.5 million a year or $15 million over a 10-year period. So, and of course, these costs just continue to inflate. So it's act now or we're going to fall further and further and further behind. And we're only one problem in one of those schools of having to replace a system, and a system is a roof, an HVAC system, plumbing, and those can be millions of dollars in cost. So you have a problem, you have to sink that money into there. That reduces your bonding potential for your project. Thank you.
Good afternoon. So like Dr. Burchett, Fleming County is very similar. We have 6 school buildings. We have 4 elementary schools, 1 middle and 1 high, locally operated vocational program. 3 of our elementary schools are 60 years or older. Like Harrison, we're trying to consolidate. Pre-pandemic, we would have had enough bonding potential to pull that off. We've done a cost estimate on consolidating those 3 elementary schools. Pre-COVID, it would have been $18 million. Now you're pushing $36, $38 million. So we've got about an $18 million budget gap there, which in turn would save the taxpayers in Fleming County almost $750,000 a year if we can consolidate those 3 elementary schools. And the board has already identified those schools as transitional. That's your first step before consolidating, and that was a 5-0 vote. But we do have an anomaly happening in Fleming County. We have the last coal-burning school in Kentucky. And that building, we've had a lot of people come there. They can't believe that we still have coal-burning schools here in Kentucky. We don't have schools, we have 1 school. And it's in Fleming County, and we're trying to fix that. However, the cost of construction has just skyrocketed. But Fleming isn't the only district in Kentucky. It touches every one of your districts. And there's a lot of schools, if you look at the KFIX list, that are 70 years or older. You just funded a 100-year-old project, Ludlow High School, and Mike Borchers, the superintendent, is here. But there's a lot more at that age that we could really address. There's no other project in schools that the general public really sees. We talk about classrooms, how nice classrooms look. The majority of the general public never see those classrooms. They do see the exteriors. They know where that money goes. So when you look at buildings from the 1960s, 1950s, and in the case of E.P. Ward, that's the coal-burning school, you see bricks falling, you see roofs collapsing, and all of those bad things you see. And it's not an exaggeration. I would welcome you to come and see, take pictures if you would like, of the coal-burning furnace. But that's happening across Kentucky right now.
If you two could just briefly touch on what the numbers were before. You had good construction numbers, and then with a slight delay, this may be more Dr. Burchett than Dr. Kreisman, but the difference in cost. What is your gap?
Well, let me dig in. So the estimates were about $45 million. I think it's similar to the Woodford project there before, and then that has increased from that first estimate. We had 4 estimates along the way, and that number's up to about 73 right now.
Right.
And
not insignificant.
Yeah, not insignificant. And of course, you've got the request and the information in front of you. We have levied the additional local nickels. We have been very careful to wisely utilize all available funding that could be put towards this. And in fact, the board has set aside millions of dollars that have come through our local operations for this project. But we still find ourselves at a shortfall. And like Mr. Ritter said, we would be we'd have to make a choice of what do we cut back, what do we phase, what can we do? And until that full transition occurs, we can't eliminate that outlying need on those elementary schools that are out there, and we can't recognize that savings that then we can reinvest in career and technical education. I mentioned that ATC facility. There's work that needs to be done with that, but the district really gets very little money to help work on that, and we are very interested in upgrading that career and technical education space as well in the future. That $1.5 million can help us do that net general fund savings that we would have in the future.
We would love to spend more time here, but we can't. We got to keep moving. We do have one question, Representative McCool.
Not really a question, Mr. Chair, if I make a quick comment,
Absolutely.
if I may. I just want to thank you and Representative Tipton for looking at this and also Mr. Ritter for bringing forth a list. We looked at this in another committee, and what we was looking at, how do you address this gap due to inflation, and really narrowed it down to those schools that are shovel-ready, and looked at the age plus population of the schools plus flood zone, and those schools have done the double nickel. So the local schools have done all they can do, and they still can't reach that goal. So I'm pleased to hear that you're possibly looking at this, and thank you, Mr. Ritter, for your report today. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I appreciate that. Representative McCool, we're basically looking at things that are totally out of their control, right? And just as a synopsis for members and for you guys, in this past session, all we did was these special offers of assistance. So if you've been here a while, it used to be called the Parsons List. You know, we took those somewhere between 15 and 20 schools. You know, we funded those schools, but we did not at all address the gap at all in this past budget session. So this will be a very important topic moving forward, and I really appreciate y'all's presentation today. Look forward to working with you guys and others.
If I could, Senator, I
Sure.
would be glad to come sit down and meet with any of you individually or any member of the General Assembly on this issue and bring our presentation. So,
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next up, we have CCLD. If they would come forward. We have about a half an hour of time in this segment. Well, I'll let you all be seated before I talk so you can listen. Whenever you get a chance, if you would identify yourself for the record, but if your presentation, if you could keep it within, say, 10 minutes, and then that'll give us plenty of time for questions. Please proceed.
Is this on? No. Oh, there we go. Dr. George Ruby, Executive Director of the Collaborative Center for Literacy Development and Associate Research Title Professor of Literacy Education at the College of Education, UK.
Oh, Dr. Lindy Harmon. Dr. Lindy Harmon. I am the Director of the Reading Recovery Center at CCLD.
Good morning. My name is Margaret Rintema. I'm Associate Dean for Undergraduate Student Success in the College of Education at the University of Kentucky. I wanted to kick us off just for a few minutes to introduce Dr. Ruby and give a little bit of information about the breadth and depth of his experience. He's an internationally noted scholar of neuroscience research on reading development and its classroom instruction. His work has appeared for over 20 years in highly competitive journals of literacy education and educational psychology, as well as in multiple editions of foundational handbooks of reading research, educational encyclopedias, and journals of literacy teacher practice. He has been executive editor of the journal Cognition and Instruction and continues to serve on the editorial review boards of several other educational research journals. He is often asked for his feedback and collaboration from literacy education scholars from across the nation. Recently, he received an award from the American Educational Research Association for his pioneering work in establishing educational neuroscience as a special focus of educational scholarship. When educational researchers discuss topics like the science of reading, dyslexia instruction, or the reading brain, Dr. Ruby and his work are sure to be named. I would very much like to thank the committee for the invitation to be here today. UK and the College of Education are committed to the good of the Commonwealth and connecting communities with the resources of a research university. CCLD, as you may know, is housed at the University of Kentucky in the College of Education. and I'm excited for Dr. Ruby to share all that they are doing for teachers and students across the Commonwealth.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Associate Dean Rentema. Appreciate that. Co-Chair West, Co-Chair Riley, and Co-Chair Tipton, thank you so much. Members of the committee, it's glad to be back with you again. I'll just very briefly, don't want to be redundant with things we have covered in the past, but just to remind you, we were created in 1998 by the General Assembly with the intention that we would bring together the literacy faculty at all 8 of the state universities to provide high-quality teacher learning on behalf of improved literacy instruction, and with that, improved student achievement. And we feel that we have been very effective in that. We do not platform particular programs or philosophies or orientations to instruction because the literacy faculty at the 8 state universities, who know more about reading research and what that recommends for good practice, have diverse opinions. And they have opinions that are very much informed by the needs and the resources of their service regions, as we'll show. Can you put that forward for me? Thank you. This is color-coded, of course, for the leading color of each of the state institutions. And thanks to this, we're able to reach the entire district. If you've seen our annual reports, and I trust you have, we provide them to you as per Kentucky Regulatory Statute 1640207, which has a couple pages worth of requirements that we meet on an annual basis, and one of them is the annual report. You will know what our annual outreach is, but it's usually just about every county in the state every year, anywhere from 1 to 5 programs. So just to give you a sense of the outreach here, these are the numbers over 5 years, and note that these are the 5 years that include our pandemic, for the Kentucky Reading Project and the Adolescent Literacy Project. We have a traditional model where the teachers come to this voluntarily, and for that reason, what we provide them has to match what the constraints and affordances, the resources and needs they have in their classroom. If we try to put forward any sort of orientation or program that would clash with the programs that their districts have chosen, local control of the school will have a lot to do with the programs and assessments that individual districts use. We would not be providing them very useful information. So we want to provide information that they can use given the programs that they are required to use and given the students with whom they work. As you see here, we also have, I should say, several specialized versions of these 2 projects, KRP and ALP, for the Read to Achieve +1 teacher PDs, for the Striving Readers grants, for the Kentucky Comprehensive Literacy grants, and so forth. And you can see the number of teachers that we reached within 5 years, and the number of students those teachers have then benefited. And then the number of students that have actually benefited, because prior to those 5 years, there were other teachers who were benefiting students. And so you have to realize that there's this accrued effect. And in previous presentations, we have shared with you the sustainability of that effect over years. Students who are taking the end of 5th grade K-Prep test have been shown to do much better if somewhere in the previous 6 years they have had at least one Kentucky Reading Project teacher, as an example. If they've had 2, the effect is significantly greater, and so forth. We also have a brand new program that just started in 2018, the Early Language and Learning Model, and that is for for pre-K and other pre-kindergarten programs in the community. So those numbers are low. And then, of course, we have Reading Recovery. And in the course of 5 years, these are the numbers of students who have been benefited from the 1st grade reading intervention program, which Dr. Harmon will talk about in a moment, and the comprehensive intervention model, which works with whole class groups. And so overall, as you can see, in 5 years, over 500,000 students are served On an annual basis, this is reaching about 21% of all students in Kentucky in the schools. And that's not equally distributed. The emphasis here is clearly on the elementary level, but that's where most of the formative experiences that students have in learning to read occur. Now, what happens if we put all of these programs together in one county? Well, we had never done that before because we have limited amounts of financing, and we want to distribute that to as many counties as possible, as many districts as possible. Well, we had a superintendent from Wayne County who visited our CCLD Share Fair, which is where the teachers from the Kentucky Reading Project and the Adolescent Literacy Project and so on come together to share their year's work and the results that they've gotten. And he was tremendously impressed. He had already had some of his teachers going into the reading recovery trainings. So he said to me, George, I want all of your programs in Wayne County. I said, well, we can't do that. We have to distribute our resources. He goes, your problem is you're spread too thin. You're doing great work, but at 21% of the students in the state, you're sort of a sub-threshold, and people are coming to take it for granted. Should note that for over 20 years, for most of the past 20 years, Kentucky has scored significantly above the national average on the National Assessment of Educational Progress reading test in 4th grade. It's only been in the past 2 testing years that we have come down to average, and we don't want to be average. We want to be above average, and we want to get back up there, and we will. So he said, you need to demonstrate what happens when you bring all your programs together, and that's what we did. And you can see the drop in novice, the orange bars, the increase in proficient, the aqua bars there, and that is fairly impressive work. And we have shared these kinds of statistics with you on a case-by-case snapshot over the years. Now, you've seen this chart before if you read that Courier Journal story, because they shared the same data. What they did not do was tell you that CCLD was the cause. Instead, they attributed the cause to a man named David Lieben. We checked with the superintendent. David Lieben has never been in Wayne County. Where he was at that time was JCPS. He's from New York. He usually does webcasts from there. And he was helping to do work there. And that didn't work out so well as he acknowledged and was quoted as acknowledging in the story. And so he now realizes what we have long and since our inception insisted upon, and that is early readers need all pistons firing. They need their phonics. They need their phonemic awareness. They certainly need their fluency, but they also need vocabulary development and comprehension development and background knowledge. And they need it all. They need writing instruction. This is what the research shows. First grade studies from the early 60s funded by the federal government, the massive reviews done by the team at Harvard in the early 70s, Marilyn Yeager Adams' work in 1990, a landmark review of the research, and of course 10 years after that, the National Reading Panel report commissioned by Congress on teaching young children to read, where we get our 5 pillars of reading from. And then more recently, just in 2020, the National Academy of Education in D.C., their report on the Reading for Understanding Initiative, 20 years worth of research funded by the federal government the past 20 years on what kids need to read for understanding and learning in schools. So that is that's what we rely upon. Now, I'll keep it short and hand it over to Dr. Harmon.
Okay, and so on this slide, you see the scope of reading recovery over the past 5 years, how many students we're working with, the amount of, trained teachers that we average per year, the district served and the schools served. And you see our demographics, they're on the right. Our outcomes dropped after the pandemic. Before the pandemic, our outcomes were about 79% of our kids made accelerated progress and reached the average of the first grade classrooms. That dropped a little after the pandemic, but still we're we're able to hang on to 65% of those kids reaching classroom average after just 20 weeks of instruction or less. And what we do know is that orange number, the 17%, those children did not reach average during the first 20 weeks of instruction, but by the end of the school year, they did. And so they continued to make progress even after the intervention was finished. We still have 18% of students who are recommended for longer-term support. Reading recovery does not work for every child, and we've always admitted that. We'd like to be at 100%, and we'll keep working toward that. But what reading recovery does for children, aside from that being important, it's also important what we can do for teachers. So the professional learning that we provide to teachers to create those responsive teachers who can respond to individual students and small groups of students is just as important. And I think, is that it?
That's it.
That's it.
So we're happy to take your questions.
Perfect. That was exactly 10 minutes. Perfect. So we're going to open it up for questions. Representative Bojanowski.
Yes, thank you. My first question is, could you, and these are all related to reading recovery, could you explain the roaming around the known aspect of reading recovery?
Certainly. The first 10 lessons are spent trying to build rapport with the child, trying to firm up what little bit the child knows. As you know, our kids come in typically below the 20th percentile, many below the 10th percentile. They don't know all their letters. They don't know all their sounds. They don't know how to handle a book. They don't know, concepts about print skills. They don't know how to write their name, some of them. So they're very, very low in those skills. So we spend the first 10 lessons, we call it roaming around the known, which I don't really like that term, but we spend that time trying to solidify any skills, the small number of skills that they do have, and through reading and writing exercises during that time. And they actually make quite a bit of progress just in those first 10 lessons, just solidifying the known, and then they're picking up knowledge as they go through those first 10 lessons.
If I may, sir? Mm-hmm. Okay. So in the literacy lessons guidebook, it says during this time frame, you do not deliberately teach any new items and behaviors. By my calculation of your 12,563 students, that is 62,815 hours of absolutely no instruction. And I find that concerning. I'm going to move on. Emily Hanford had a podcast that dropped last week. She's a journalist, and there was a statement in there about Mari Clay, and this was in 2001 when she was trying to qualify for Reading First funding. And she was told that she didn't qualify, but that she could modify her program to include proper training for teachers and decoding skills so she could help turn the tide towards reading science. And the rumor is, and this is not something in print, this is through anecdotal conversations, she said, we will not change a thing in our program, but we will modify our description of reading recovery to comply with the law. And so what I've done recently, and so I have two different reading recovery manuals. I've got one from 1993, and I have the one from 2016. And what I've done is I've taken kind of a look through to see what has changed in reading recovery since, let's just say, from 1993, so the last 29 years. The procedure during a reading recovery lesson is the same. Reread familiar books, read yesterday's book, work a little bit on letter identification, write a story, hearing and recording sounds and words, reconstruct a cut-up story, share introduction to a new book, and read a new book. So that hasn't changed. There are direct quotes in both of the books that say, you can let the child predict a word, if he doesn't know a word, that he expects it to be based on his oral language. You can cover the problem word and ask for something you know he knows about that word. And there's this cueing process. The questions, does this word look right? Does it sound right to you? Does it make sense? What else could it be? These are verbatim in both of these manuals, before the National Reading Panel and to date today. If a child has bias towards using mainly letters, the teacher may orient the child to a picture as a source of meaning. Never in these manuals, I teach reading every day. And as my children read a book, if they get to a word they don't know, I write it on a whiteboard. We talk about what letters are in that word, what sounds we've explicitly and systematically learned that could be applied to that word. Never did I read, say the sounds of the letters and then blend it to make a word. So my question for you is, we have tens of millions of dollars of taxpayer dollars, not just through CCLD, but through certified reading recovery teachers. And by my evaluation, there has not been a change in more than 30 years. If your physician did not change his practice based on new research from the last 30 years, he would be considered to be in medical malpractice. My concern is here we have a curriculum that is based on a theory that Marie Clay had that perseverates throughout our state. What has changed in reading recovery over the last 30 years that could tell me? You can tell me that you have, it's right here in your flyer, cognitive skills and process modules.
Yes.
But if that's not part of the procedure of how children are taught to read, then it just infuriates me to think that we have this. And not only does this curriculum deal with children who are doing interventions, JCPS's primary reading curriculum is Jan Richardson Guided Reading. Jan Richardson is a reading recovery teacher leader. This is Tier 1 instruction. Jan Richardson, from my evaluation, is effectively reading recovery for whole class and small groups. So I'm very concerned. And could you explain to me what has changed based on new research over the last 30 years in the reading recovery program?
Well, I'm sure that I can't explain what's changed over the last 30 years, but I can at least tell you, as long as I have been in reading recovery, the things that have changed. When the research on phonemic awareness and phonological awareness became clear, Dr. Clay did add Elkonin boxes, the use of those in writing to as a framework to and a scaffold for teachers to help students hear sounds and words. There's also letter boxes that come after that on the progression to help students to understand orthography and spelling. She also added a part to the lesson that talks about using magnetic letters and at the whiteboard to learn letters and sounds and break words into larger chunks. Which supports the text reading. And we also, in reading recovery, use a whiteboard. Every lesson you see will see a whiteboard on the table with a marker and magnetic letters close by, so that when a child needs to problem solve a word, we can take them very quickly to that. In regards to, what did you say about, I'm sorry, blending a word together or blending the sounds together. One of the things in the Courier Journal, that article that talked about the child who stopped on the word blue, that teacher did not tell him to look at the picture. What she did was pick up a small masking card and cover the back of the word and expose the blend, the BL, because she had already moved him from using letter by letter sounding to using larger chunks of print, which is more efficient. And so she was doing that, and her focus for that lesson was not just how to decode the word blue or learn the word blue or know what the word blue was. Her actual focus was teaching the child how to take a word apart into multiple parts, first part, last part, sound it out in parts rather than letter by letter, which is what he had been doing, and then reread the sentence and check on himself in context, because there are 25 years of research about combining context with decoding as a form of assist and as a form of checking on oneself, which really was teaching the child a self-regulated strategy that he can take back into the classroom and read on his own without appealing to the teacher or someone else to help him problem solve.
And if I may just
If you could wrap it up here, we got other questions.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to close with a quote from Stanislas Dehaene, Cognitive Neuroscience. We know that the conversion of letters into sounds is the key stage in reading acquisition. All teaching efforts should be initially focused on a single goal, the grasp of the alphabetic principle whereby each letter or grapheme represents a phoneme. Children need to understand that only in the analysis of letters one by one will allow them to discover a word's identity. I thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Representative Riley.
Thank you, Senator West. I'll try to make this as quickly as possible. I don't really have a question. First of all, thank you for your presentation. I truly appreciate the work Senator West, Representative Tipton, Representative Bojanowski, and others did in the session last time to deal with reading. I know Representative Lewis and I met with some people yesterday about this issue, about reading, and we know this was a huge issue in the state before the pandemic. I think we're obviously understand that it's a greater problem coming out of the pandemic. And one of the things that we talked to Representative Lewis and I talked about when we talked to people yesterday is that now in K through 3, I think we all will agree is the most important area as far as reading is concerned. And it gets, it also is big later on, but that's the area of the greatest concern. And that in K through 3 now in Kentucky, even more than ever, our most important subject areas need to be reading and math. And then our next most important subject areas need to be reading and math. And then our next ones need to be reading and math. And we cannot emphasize those areas enough because eventually they affect all the rest of education. This is what our students need. I think this is what our parents demand. I think this is what our teachers and administrators understand, that we cannot put enough emphasis on that because it impacts every other area of education. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Riley. Representative Tipton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate you being here today. If you'll give me a little latitude, Mr. Chairman.
Please proceed.
KRS 164.0207, actually statute, establishes CCLD and gives you the guidance on your guidelines. Section 2 says the center shall review national research and disseminate appropriate research abstracts when appropriate, as well as conduct ongoing research of reading programs throughout the state. It goes on your website under your research section. I reviewed that, and there are 11 subgroups for research. The last addition to that research was in 2016. Has there been no research done since 2016 on any of these subjects? And are you fulfilling the guidelines of KRS 164 by not having that on there? Additional research.
Thank you, Representative Tipton. It's an excellent question. No, what we had done is run into a bit of internet paralysis. We lost our IT person who updates the website for us, and we went out for about 9 months without anyone there. And then we brought in a new person, and he's gotten things up and running. And in the process, we've decided to do a complete overhaul to provide the sort of research references to which you allude in ways that might be more useful and more efficient than what we were doing in the past. Now, we still do research updates. In fact, I just did one. It's a real nifty 2-pager with about 3-page of endnotes that are small print references, about 50 odd references, and very few of those references date from before 2016. There are. It should be understood, though, however, that the newest research study is not necessarily the best. You can often get a single study that gets published because it seems to overturn the consensus mainstream view of what we should expect. But very often it turns out in retrospect we find that those are reporting false positives. This is a widespread issue in cognitive psychology and social psychology as well. It has to do with the way the p-values are determined and as a result how many subjects are in this study set. But in any case, we are in the process of updating that. We just got Captivate, which is a program that will allow us to do animated PowerPoints to help make these the research findings more accessible for you. So if you would like, we can send you that 2-pager as a quick update. And we also have a technical report out now that this is the first year we've provided it. This was suggested, I believe it was this committee that suggested this about a year ago or so, maybe about a year and a half, where the internal documents that we rely on to make choices and the research that we rely upon are assembled there. And we don't always share that on the website because most of the people who use that website are school teachers and teacher educators who may not have a background in reading, and a lot of the research is technical, and so it wouldn't be a lot of value to them. But we want to translate it for them.
Okay, thank you. I believe this next question may be directed to Dr. Harmon. Representative Bojanowski in her comments and question, I believe, alluded to this. Could you explain to the committee what's referred to as the 3Q system in regard to literacy?
Well, don't know if I can or not, because the 3Qing system was not invented by Dr. Clay. I think what people assume that Reading Recovery teaches the 3Qing system, because we do ask children to check on themselves and give them those self-regulated strategies to work with meaning and visual information in print. And so the visual information also includes phonemic awareness, phonological awareness, the sounds in the words. And so we're asking kids to cross-check those two sources of information. Reading Recovery is an information processing model. And so we do ask them to cross-check, and some people call that a queuing system. I don't know if Dr. Ruby has any thoughts on the queuing system.
Well, I'm not keen on information processing models. I prefer pattern learning and recognition models. That's the more current neuroscientific view of what's going on there. The 3 queuing system, that's where you're trying to determine the text's meaning on the basis of the graphophonemic, the orthographic, and sound representation of that. That's the first system. The other system is the syntactic system. That's your grammatical relationship. And then the third system is the semantic content. That would be your vocabulary and meaning that is intended by the author. And you use some of the queuing systems to back propagate. In other words, if you're having trouble with the word, people who use that system will ask a student, and I think I'm right on this, that you will ask a student to, well, does that make sense in the sentence, right? In other words, so it's kind of a guessing, best guess probability sort of approach. That's not a mainstream view. I don't think you'll find a lot of people among the CCLD faculty at the 8 state universities advancing that. They may share what that is because people have those questions, but it's good to teach. You certainly want to teach grammatical relationship. You certainly want to teach semantics and vocabulary. Those certainly are important in making sense of a text. But as a queuing system, that's a little perhaps more challenging.
Mr. Chairman, if you'll indulge me.
We're running out of time, so if you could make it tight.
In the Courier Journal article, there was a reference to the contracts between a school district and I guess it would be Reading Recovery, Ohio State, whoever serves that contract for data collection. and the contract requires the school district to pay to Reading Recovery a fee for data collection. What troubled me was the comment that information is not available even to the school board. Could you give me some clarification on who has access to that data and roughly what the cost of that data collection is per year in the state of Kentucky?
All teachers, reading recovery teachers, have to follow standards and guidelines to maintain their certification as a reading recovery teacher. And part of that is they have to enter data on a web-based system just to monitor implementation. Those contracts are between the school district and the Ohio State University International Data Evaluation Center. There are no fees paid from the University Training Center to that data collection entity, and so that's all between the district and IDAC. I think each teacher leader site across the state has to pay, I think it's $600 for the site, and then I think right now it's like $80 or $85 per teacher, per trained teacher, for them to enter that data.
What concerns me, and the figure I was given was $180,000 a year, so I'd like to get verification on that, is that we've potentially got taxpayer funds being spent on a process, and school board can't get that data, the legislature can't get that data. That is very, very troubling to me.
Well, I think one of the reasons that it's not widely available, it belongs to the school district, so I can't give you that data. It belongs to the school district, and they have to sign human subjects research agreements between OSU and the district. Excuse me. And in addition to that, the numbers of students that we work with are so small in each building. So if you have a building where there's only one reading recovery teacher and 6 first grade classrooms or 3 first grade classrooms, and she's only working with 8 reading recovery students a year, we would be outside of federal guidelines and state guidelines about sharing data on students in that small population. They could be readily identified.
I understand the issue with the small student, but surely in the aggregate, you even had a slide from Ohio State with some reading recovery data in your presentation.
Right.
So any aggregate data that is available would be very appreciated for us in the committee to have.
I can check. I will check.
Thank you.
And that graph was from Ohio State.
And as Representative Riley stated, this is the key educational issue.
It is.
And the people who worked on Senate Bill 9 do care about the children of the Commonwealth of Kentucky.
Representative Graham, if I could, Representative, your mic's not on. There you go.
You know, when I was chair of the House Education Committee, you came before our committee. We had these same discussions. And I think as an educator, but as a father, I think we need to go way beyond, and this is from my take. When I first got into the General Assembly, the pediatricians in their office, I don't know if they still do this, provided information about brain development. And parents were able to be given that. It stayed out in the lobby. They didn't push it. It was just there in the lobby. And then over a period of time, I don't know if they still do that, because a lot of parents don't understand during that period of pregnancy how important it is for brain development. And when it comes down to it, that's the key issue. Many of these kids have not been provided with a nutritional amount in terms of what is needed, in terms of what helps develop the child, the whole child. And so I don't know if we can go back to that, working with the medical community, particularly those who are pediatricians and those who are that deliver children, and the parents go to that individual. But I think it's a whole latitude of things. And those of us who have been in the classroom, we understand it, how important it is for that brain development as soon as that baby starts developing over that period of time. And so emphasis should also be placed somewhere where we can develop some kind of program. I don't know if other states have done this or not, but I would hope that we could look at some kind of way in which we can promote this with our families all across the Commonwealth to make sure that kids will have an advantage once they are born, and that the parents continue to read and to talk and to do those kind of communication skills that help develop the brain. So that's my comment as an educator.
And I completely agree with you, Representative Graham. It's tremendously important. I've often recommended that where we need to include that as a literacy element is in high school, because those are where we're going to find future parents who need to know about that in their health classes. And I do know that pediatricians provide that information, but they seem to do it in waves. It becomes popular, their materials and so on, and then other things come to the fore. But you're quite right. Nutrition is tremendously important. Neonatal health care is tremendously important. Many children have ear infections in infancy that go unremarked, and some people have speculated that that might have something to do with phonemic processing difficulties in some cases. So that's health is tremendously important. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That will. We have one other speaker on this topic area. She's going to come forward now, and then we'll finish up. But thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
We appreciate you coming. Mrs. Dunk, if you would come forward. You'll have about 4 minutes. Unfortunately, that's how Frankfurt works.
Right.
You'll have to condense an hour worth of material into 4 minutes. So once you're seated, if you would say your names for the record and then proceed with your presentation.
I'm Brandy Dunk.
Microphone needs to be on green.
I'm Brandy Dunk.
There you go.
I'm Kira Dunk.
Miss Kira. As many of you know, Kira from last session, she wrote Cammie's Law, HB 263. So
we remember you. Welcome back. Please proceed.
Okay, so I don't have a fancy title. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a teacher. I'm just a mom. But I am a mom that cares a lot about my kids' education and literacy in Kentucky. And what I've seen today and heard today, from my standpoint and the research I've done, is quite concerning. A couple of things I want to point on just from the prior testimony is that Representative Tipton, you pointed out that there had been no research updated since 2016. And their reply was that they were without an internet person for 9 months. Well, that still doesn't explain a 6-year gap. 9 months of employment doesn't explain a 6-year gap and no new research. I also wanted reading recovery. I have seen it firsthand. I've watched 3 of my kids go through it, and due to the pandemic, I was actually able to watch it one-on-one. Despite the pandemic, my son went to school 4 days a week for 30 minutes to work one-on-one with reading recovery. At the start of that, his DRA score was an 8. He was in 2nd grade, and 8 is the beginning of 1st grade. At the end of reading recovery, which was, it was a total of 8 weeks, going 4 times a week for 30 minutes. He got extra because of the pandemic. His DRA score remained an 8. There was no change. Since then, his school, LaGrange Elementary, has implemented some training with structured literacy, recipe for reading, which is aligned with structured literacy, which goes away from reading recovery. He has been in that. He has not been doing any one-on-one except for one time, 30 minutes a week, and that is it. His DRA score has improved to 12. So he's making progress. Also, I do have with me Oldham County's data for their reading recovery program. And what it has shown, now, of course, these aren't large groups of students. The 2017-2018 year, pre-pandemic, there were 134 students who had received reading recovery when they were in first grade. Their fourth grade year, they were retested. 40% of those students were still at a novice level, 46%. 35% were at apprentice. 16% were at proficient, and 3 were at distinguished. Those numbers aren't good enough to me. And there have been multiple states, 10 actually, so not multiple, but that have all been legislating changes. All of them have seen their reading literacy numbers improve. Most recently, you know, if we look at data from Mississippi, they've always been very behind us. Back in 2013, Mississippi was at their fourth grader reading score was at a 209, and Kentucky was at a 223 on average. Now in 2022, even despite the pandemic, Mississippi's already back at pre-pandemic levels. And they are now above Kentucky. Their score is now a 216, Kentucky's a 215. So while they have seen growth in literacy, Kentucky has just kind of stayed on the path, and we're dropping.
You've got about 1 minute.
Okay, sorry.
Try to wrap up. You're good.
This is a binder that Dr. Melissa Runyon, who's a parent of a child in Oldham County Schools, put together. It has tons of independent, peer-reviewed studies that show that reading recovery is not working, and that balanced literacy, which is our Tier 1 curriculum, is not working. Kira is a very bright young girl. Like, she wrote that law. She loves advocating in Frankfort, and she's agreed for me to share this, even though she thinks you all are going to judge her now, but I assured her you won't. Extremely bright. She went through reading recovery. She struggles with reading. She's an 8th grader. She was given a test the other day. She spells at a 2nd grade level at a 33% accuracy rate. And that is normal. For Oldham County Schools, I've talked to every middle school teacher that teaches ELA, and they said her spelling and her punctuation and grammar are normal. That's not good enough. That will not work in the real world. We have to change.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, that will have to be it for today. We don't have time for questions. Obviously, a really, really complicated subject and important subject to the Commonwealth of Kentucky as we move forward. Thank you for your excellent presentations today, and I'm sure we'll cover this topic in the future soon. So thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
That concludes this meeting. We have to vacate the room in preparation for the 1 o'clock A&R meeting.